Let's start our session. So it's a plenary session, and it's very unusual and very stimulating. It will be very stimulating and very unusual because we will be talking about exploring the art of psychobiography. And our two presenters, two co-panelists will be Dr. Jeffrey Rubin and Dr. William McKinley Runyan, both psychobiographers, both coming from different parts of this social disciplinary world. Psychobiography represents the intensive psychological study of individuals within their unique socio-cultural historic context. This transdisciplinary field encompasses multiple approaches. Some scholars employ a bottom-up methodology, examining how childhood experiences and early relationship shape personality, emotional life, and career trajectories. Others utilize top-down approaches grounded in psychological theory, personality psychology, sociology, anthropology, and other disciplines. Today's panel brings together two distinguished voices who have profoundly shaped the field of psychobiography through their scholarly contributions and methodological innovations. Jeffrey Rubin will explore the art of psychoanalytic psychobiography, drawing from his extensive experience writing psychobiographies of figures ranging from Shakespeare and Freud to Winnicott and David Lane. Dr. Rubin will address the nature of psychobiography as a remarkable tool for illuminating lives and work. He will guide us through the practical aspects of psychobiographical work, from topic selection to the complex process of research and completion. William McKinley Runyan, or Mac Runyan, how he likes to call himself, will discuss psychobiography and humanistic psychology. He will share his personal journey from his early exposure to Abraham Maslow and Carl Rogers in 1960s through his Harvard doctoral work with Henry Murray and Robert White. Dr. Runyan, whose contributions span from his foundational Life Histories and Psychobiography in 1982 book and his recent work on historicizing psychology, will illuminate how humanistic psychology has influenced the study of individual lives and how the field has evolved alongside broader developments in psychological methodology. Together, these presentations promise to reveal both the artistic dimensions and rigorous methodological foundations that make psychobiography such a vital tool for understanding human experience across cultural and historical and psychological dimension. So the first presentation will be by Dr. Jeffrey Rubin, and I'll say a few words about him. So Dr. Jeffrey Rubin practices psychoanalysis and psychoanalytically oriented psychotherapy in New York City and North Salem, New York. He teaches the Object Relation Institute of New York City, the American Institute of Psychoanalysis, and the C.G. Jung Institute of New York. He's an author of 8 books: A Psychoanalysis for Our Time, The Good Life, Psychotherapy and Buddhism, The Art of Flourishing, Meditative Psychotherapy and Practicing Meditative Psychotherapy, and the forthcoming 2 books, Psychotherapy, Case Studies, Escaping the Prison You Didn't Know You Were In, and Meditative Psychotherapy and Psychoanalysis, Pathways to Healing and Transformation. He has taught at various psychoanalytic institutes, meditation, yoga centers, and lectured around the country and abroad on the integration of psychoanalysis, Buddhism, and meditation. Dr. Rubin is most interested in pluralistic psychoanalysis that respects the genuine insights and practices from each analytic tradition and draws on the best and has been taught and said from all psychoanalytic schools, as well as history, art, literature, anthropology, and anything that illuminates the human condition. His pioneering approach to therapy was described by Chip Brown in 2009 New York Times article as enlightenment therapy. And more information you can find on Dr. Rubin's website, which is easy to remember, www.drjeffreyrubin.com. So without any further delay, I am giving the podium to Dr. Jeffrey Rubin. Please unmute yourself and take it away.
Thank you very much, Ina. Thank you for having me here. In 1980, I was given as a gift Atwood and Stollerow's Faces in a Cloud, Subjectivity and Personality Theory, which were studies of seminal analytic theorists from Freud, Rank, Carl Jung, and Wilhelm Reich. Their masterful psychobiographies, linking the lives and theories of these pioneers, were a revelation to me, opening up a new intellectual and emotional universe. I saw with unmistakable clarity the way psychological and philosophical theories were not the isolated product of solitary contemplation, but emerged directly out of the life experience of their creators. I never looked at human lives or psychoanalytic theories, works of art, or philosophy the same way again. In the 1990s, I wrote psychobiographies of Freud, Winnicott, and Kohut. The data was drawn from theoretical writings, letters, diaries, interviews, memoirs, reflections on recurrent modes of thought and conduct in their lives, contemporary testimony from colleagues, and attention to the range of thoughts, feelings, and fantasies evoked in me by immersion in their life and thoughts. 5 psychoanalytic perspectives deepen my psychobiographical reflections. From classical analysis, I utilize the developmental perspective, the attention to self-protective processes, and the creative states of mind Freud termed evenly hovering attention and free association. Intersubjectivity theory sensitized me to the irreducibly relational nature of human development and the therapeutic and psychobiographical process. Self-psychology and object relations theory refined my understanding of issues related to identity, the other, and the formative role of caregivers in emotional development. My perspective was also enriched by the focus in interpersonal psychoanalysis on the therapeutic value of interpersonal enactments and on one's own subjective reactions as a potentially useful source of data. In recent years, I've become interested in the emotional underpinnings of perplexing contemporary political and cultural forces, from the appeal of authoritarians to the psychology of white supremacists. I was deeply troubled by what felt like a tsunami of wickedness and madness, which I wanted to make sense of. As a psychoanalyst, I believe that politicians, like ordinary citizens, are shaped by the families they grew up in, the history they experienced, and the consequent feelings that arose. Because most people, in my opinion, from pundits to the rest of us, all too often approach politics consciously and cognitively, the hidden emotional forces that shape it are often minimized and neglected. Politics, like history, also reflects the unconscious motivations and feelings of the people involved, leaders and the led. I hoped and believed that psychoanalytic wisdom could be brought to bear on these and related topics. I wrote psychobiographies of Trump, the Koch brothers, David Lane, a notorious white supremacist, and Shulamith Firestone, a visionary second-generation feminist. It was emotionally clarifying to attempt to shed light on these figures. It was also painful to dwell in their universes. During COVID-19, I returned to a project I begun years ago, a psychobiographical study of Shakespeare, which is nearly completed. Stollerow and Atwood's seminal insight about the connection between one's biography and one's work guided and inspired all these efforts, which have been both intellectually and emotionally gratifying. I have loved exploring and illuminating the lives, theories, and art of analysts, political figures, and literary geniuses, respectively. I didn't think of myself as a psychobiographer, even though I wrote psychobiographies, until I became involved with the International Psychohistorical Association and got to know several psychohistorical colleagues, Paul Elovitz, Ina Rosensfit, Jim Anderson, Ken Rasmussen, who wrote psychobiographies. Before I met them, I thought of myself as an analyst. As I began to also identify as a psychobiographer, the theory method, and underlying assumptions of how I think and work, and the possible reasons came into clearer focus. Human beings are remarkable symbol-generating creatures who are night shift artists, fashioning phantasmagorical dreamscapes that rival Dadaist and Surrealist artists. This is our first superpower. The chief lesson my patients have taught me in about 43 years of practicing analysis and analytically oriented psychotherapy, the chief lesson they've taught me is the importance of valuing human experience and the fact that we continuously reveal more than we know about ourselves via our speech and symbolic communications, including our symptoms and actions. Clinical experience has repeatedly taught me there's always an emotional logic to what people say or do, even apparently bizarre behavior, but that only becomes evident when we understand the underlying history that shaped it. Central to my view of psychobiography is that psychological theories, political philosophies, or artistic creations of the person being studied by the psychobiographer are often memorials of their unwitnessed pain and an unconscious attempt to communicate, make sense of, and heal underlying psychological disturbances. Our second superpower is our remarkable capacity to cultivate heightened attentiveness, focus, and clarity, and decipher unconscious and symbolic communication. Decades of immersion in psychoanalysis and Eastern meditative and somatic disciplines, Buddhist meditation, Chinese martial arts and Qigong, and Indian yoga, resulted in me in a kind of marriage of Buddha and Freud, a union of mindfulness and meaning making that made each wisdom tradition richer than if pursued alone. Integrating Asian contemplative and Western analytic practice provided an invaluable tool for making sense of human experience. And this helped me discover genuinely new facets of what I study. For example, from my perspective, the real big lie is not that Biden stole the 2020 presidential election, which there's never been any actual historical evidence for, but that Trump is unconsciously afraid he's a loser, the very phrase used to denigrate everyone at his dinner table growing up. What's new in this old and troubling news is that Trump's lie and his insane and baseless claim encodes two vitally subjective truths for him. He was robbed, but by his sadistic father and cold mother, not Biden and the Democrats, and beneath his grandiosity and bravado lives a scared little boy who's desperately terrified that he's an abject failure in his father's condemnatory eyes, which he tragically identifies with. I recognize these crucial psychohistorical actualities because of the tools of psychoanalysis and psychobiography and the meditative psychoanalytic way that I listen. Paul Elevitz's invitation to contribute an essay on the psychobiography of the psychobiographer to Clio's Psyche resulted in me thinking more self-consciously about the method underlying my psychobiographical approach to psychoanalysts, political figures, and creative artists. And that's what I want to talk about a little bit today. Go where the energy is, my friend, teacher, and mentor Joel Kramer used to say to me. The psychobiographical process begins for me with feeling drawn to a topic either out of passion or perplexity, interest or befuddlement. On the one hand, I've loved Shakespeare since I first read him in high school. On the other hand, I was disturbed by and didn't understand what felt like a tidal wave of evil in the world. So it can be what you're passionate about or what disgusts you. It can be either thing, but what you're passionate about in either case can be what draws you into psychobiography. Next for me, and I was trying to talk about this during Howard's presentation, but I don't think anyone maybe understood what I was saying. Next for me comes wholehearted immersion in the life world of the person I'm studying, combined with self-forgetfulness, by which I mean attempting to bracket what I assume or believe or think I know, which fosters greater emotional intimacy with who or what I'm studying. In other words, I dive into the history of the person without any, or an attempt at least, without any agenda or concern for what I think I know. I try to let the material speak to me, teach, and guide me rather than superimpose my prior assumptions or wishes. And this is what I was trying to say in Howard's meeting. This opens up a space in which the otherness of what I encounter can potentially touch and grace me. What I initially believe can be a hindrance in elucidating the way the person I'm studying is different than me. Next, I return to myself and attempt to empathize, reflect on, and play with what initially arose when I delved into the material. So this phase is the opposite. First, there's what I'm calling self-forgetfulness, and then the next phase, it's very much about you. It's drawing on your life experiences, your reading, your experience and analysis, supervision, everything. But the first stage is trying to temporarily bracket that, open to the other, let the other touch you, and then come back to yourself. Okay. I'm alert. I try to be alert to striking imagery and theoretical contradictions or tensions. So let's get down and dirty. When I was reading Winnicott, who I've read since, my 20s, since graduate school, when I was reading Winnicott, I suddenly saw something that I hadn't read anywhere, which was the true self is one of the summum bonums of his whole work. Discovering the true self, helping the true self find the light of day, is crucial to the heart of successful treatment. So far, so good. We know that if we've looked at Winnicott. But then what Winnicott says, if you read him closely, is that finding the true self is like a rape. It's a massive violation. So I started getting interested in this. Well, I mean, which is it? The true self must be found. If the true self found, it's utterly devastating. You have to see his language, but it's utterly devastating. So this was a clue, something is up. Not that he's crazy, but that something is interesting and unconscious and a signal for a psychobiographical exploration. Okay. Does that make sense so far, what I'm saying? Okay. When I was writing my psychobiography of Freud, an important clue was his contradictory claim that the mother-son relationship is, quote, altogether the most perfect, the most free from ambivalence of all human relationships. Let me repeat. Freud claims the mother-son relationship is altogether the most perfect, the most free from ambivalence of all human relationships. One small problem. If we know Freud's work, the hallmark of Freud's work is that conflict and ambivalence are everywhere. They permeate all relationships. So again, he's not crazy, but something is unconsciously being communicated. There's an evocative tension in that. Okay. And then I start pulling on that thread. A psychoanalytic psychobiographer must also stay alert to repetitive or irrational themes and universalizing claims. I don't have a good quote for this, but you may all have better quotes than me. But universalizing claims, I became friendly with Karen Horney's daughter some years ago, Marianne Horney Eckhart, who unfortunately passed a few years ago. She was about 106, practicing. She was over 100 and she was practicing. She was the discussant of a paper I gave. And unlike most discussants, she was really, really engaged the paper and enriched it. So I wrote her an email thanking her, saying to her that I don't like to ever have discussants because they just take over the paper. They don't really engage it. And I was really grateful to her. She wrote back to me and she was touched by what I said. And she says, I come to New York every 6 weeks. Let's meet. And so we met and it became a very meaningful friendship, I think, to both of us. And we would have these 3-hour long dialogues, literature, art, history, psychoanalysis. And she had a perspective, of course, I didn't have. And I one time said, what do you like about your mother's work and what don't you like? And she said, well, my mother links everything to anxiety. And she said, as we've talked about for many hours, you and I, it's never one thing. A patient isn't a Horneyan. They're a person. And Klein, Horney, Winnicott, Freud, Ferenczi, Fairbairn may illuminate, Charles Brenner may illuminate it, but usually the universalizing claims that the author makes overshoot and then miss some of the subjectivity of the person they're looking at. So that's a clue. When someone is universalizing, all neurosis is due to fill in the blank, anxiety, sexuality, catastrophic thoughts, whatever it is. So that's a clue something is up to explore psychobiographically. Next, one-sided formulations and symptomatic omissions are also crucial for me in analytic psychobiographies. So as I dove into Shakespeare, what I discovered to my horror, but also interest, is all the mothers in Shakespeare are either rapacious figures like Lady Macbeth or Volumnia, or absent. This is really interesting. Mothers are absent. So Cordelia has no mother. There's no Mrs. Lear. Prospero has no wife. And we don't comment on this. Feminist critics have looked at this a little bit, but they don't make enough of it because they don't really know psychoanalysis. So that's what we look for too. Universalizing claims, one-sided formulations, symptomatic omissions. Okay. When I encountered Shakespeare as a middle-aged man, themes that I read past as a college student and high school student: mistaken and stolen identities, absent and predatory mothers, familial betrayals, murdered children, they struck me with a greater force. So a crucial dimension of my process is remaining alert to what thoughts, feelings, fantasies, visual images, and somatic sensations arise within me when I'm engaging the person I'm doing the psychobiography on, and riffing with the material like a jazz improviser who's grounded in the fundamentals of human development and motivation, yet capable of springing from the conscious and manifest level to the hidden and unsuspected depths. So I began to wonder more specifically if Shakespeare's plays were a heartbreaking tale of what happened to him, as well as a remarkable illumination of the human condition. Okay, let me actually give an example of that. So now I'm forgetting the name of the play, but during COVID, I read some of the plays that I had never read before, and one of the plays there's rape and hands cut off and tongues cut out throughout the whole thing. It's just a horrible, horrible tableau. And people think that the tragedy is not as mature as Lear, Macbeth, Othello, etc. But I thought it might be a sign of what's important to understand Shakespeare. So in it, a character is raped and they cut out her tongue, and I think also lop off her hands. And there's a man named Marcus who listens to her with still attention. Everyone else is humiliating her after she's brutalized. And Marcus is listening with still attention, which I think is like an analyst, to read the alphabet of her heart, I think is the way it goes. Okay. Now, Volumnia, I'm not sorry, not Volumnia. This character wedges open a copy of Ovid's Metamorphoses, which happens to be lying there. And we know with Shakespeare, very little is accidental. So she opens up a passage about Philomela. So I go off to Ovid's Metamorphoses, and I had not read all of it. And the story of Philomela is the following. Philomela is the king's wife's sister. The king's wife says, I want to see my sister Philomela. The king says, I will go get her. He goes and gets his wife's sister Philomela, and then he abuses her. And he threatens to kill her if she tells the tale. Philomela, brutalized, comes back to the kingdom, and she weaves a tapestry. And when she weaves the tapestry, her sister knows that she's been violated by her husband. Okay. I think so either this is a sort of extraordinary speculation or Shakespeare's an extraordinary genius. And I think it's the latter. But I think the plays are the tapestry that Shakespeare wove of what he couldn't say that had happened to him. Okay. Doing psychoanalytic psychobiography. Because I want to be a little bit practical, not just theoretical. So last night I started thinking, what can I share with you that'll help you if you're already doing it or you want to do it, whether you're a very experienced analyst or whether you're a beginner. Okay, so doing psychoanalytic psychobiography. These are just, treat what I'm saying as my footprints of my journey, not a blueprint for yours, but just possibilities. Choose a person you feel passionate about, interested in, or disturbed by. Immerse yourself in their life without an agenda. Bracket what you know and believe. Notice what's evoked in you. Reflect on striking imagery and evocative metaphors, theoretical contradictions and tensions, repetitive or irrational themes or claims. Freud, this was a clue to me too. Freud said women have a deficient sense of justice. That seemed like a really strange theme, and I think it related, though, to his relationship with Amelia Freud, his mother. So notice overdone, overplayed, repetitive, irrational claims or themes. Notice unexplained strangeness. Notice excessive or insufficient emotions. Notice symptomatic omissions. I wish I could get more specific, but I can't. But years ago, I taught a course on major figures after Freud at an institute. And as a lark, sort of as the playful, kind of Winnicottian, just playing, I looked up the favorite music of a lot of these different people. And what I did at the beginning of the session on that person, I didn't say anything. I just turned on the music, played the music, whatever, Beethoven, Brahms, whatever it was. And then we talked about the theorist. And inevitably, it's very hard to explain, but it's kind of what Howard was getting at. Inevitably, there was an emotional link that you could feel between the music, whether it's Beethoven's Fifth or Eine kleine Nacht music. You could feel a link between the life world and the inner life and the inner somatic life of the theorist and what their theories said. It was very interesting. I tried to frankly do that during break to find specific examples, and I couldn't find it. I looked up Freud's favorite music, and it was Mozart's The Marriage of Figaro and Don Giovanni, and Carmen and Beethoven and Brahms. And I looked up Shakespeare, and I didn't really get anything. We don't know. We don't know for sure. I would have liked, ideally, to give you an example, but play with that a little bit, finding out the favorite music of the person that you are writing about. It could be a political figure. It could be an analyst. It could be an artist. It could be a novelist, poet, anything. Okay. Then notice potential linkages between the life and the work. Try to figure out, and also this is very crucial, try to figure out where your identification is with the subject. When some of you I think were there, I think Susan, some of you were there, trying to look around, Mac maybe, I'm not sure, but some of you were there at the Psychohistorical Forum about a year ago when I presented my preliminary thoughts on Shakespeare. I sent out the introduction. I see some Shakespeare's. Gabriella, you were there. And I was challenged on this issue of what's your identification, and I couldn't answer it. And frankly, at first, I kind of pushed it away, but I always listen, even if part of me is pushing something away, I always stay with it. And so when I got off the call, I started thinking about it, and it began a several week-long process. Paul asked me that, Ina asked me that, Jim Anderson asked me that. It began a very generative process of why exactly me and Shakespeare? Why did I write about Shakespeare? So I encourage you to, even if you don't want to at first, try to figure out what is your identification with the subject. Is it you identify with them and the story of William James or Henry James or Emily Dickinson resonates with, or Jacques Derrida resonates with your own? Is it revenge? Orwell talks about sometimes writing as revenge. Is it sympathetic understanding? For me, frankly, one of the things was I wanted to save Shakespeare. I wanted to understand him. I had the same fantasy with David Foster Wallace, who some of you know, one of the key figures of his generation, and hung himself. And I so much wish I could have had him in treatment. And we can get into that later, my own identification, the reasons for my identification, but I identified with trying to give voice to the voiceless and help those that no one helped before. So try to figure out what your identification is with the subject. And then notice when your research and writing is generative, when it's a gift that keeps on giving. For me, that's a sign that you're in your own personal zone of creativity. People that write a lot, like Susan, you probably have this experience. You can feel you're riding a wave of something that's really important. Trust that, stay with that, create space for that. Don't interfere with that. Let it unfold. Now, you also may have the opposite experience. The research is no longer generative or feels stale or cliched. That can be because you need to shake it up and look at it in a new way, or it can be that there's really nothing new. You've really seen to the depths of the person, and it's a sign you may want to put it to bed. Okay.
Jeffrey, I'm sorry, we're already in a half an hour.
Okay.
So if we can
and I just have one more
conclude. Yes, of
very
course, of course. Yes.
This is very important. I think my interest in lives, analytic and historical, political and artistic, was related, at least in part, to my own being marginalized and eclipsed in childhood. I want to give credit here to Lloyd DeMoss, the founder of this organization, who in the history of childhood taught us that what happens in childhood matters and shapes our adult life and relationships. Let's leave it at that because of the time. Okay, thank you very much.